This is Rosen Institute's Your Law Firm, where Lee Rosen and Ned Days cover management, marketing, finance, and new technologies for building the practice you deserve. Here's Lee Rosen.
It's good to be with you today from Yerevan, Armenia. This is a pretty extended stay for us. We're getting to know the city, and I have to say that I really like Yerevan. The people are friendly, the city is really attractive, the food is terrific, and the town is always happening. There's always something percolating and popping. My daily wanders around Yerevan, they always turn up something new and different. There's always a surprise. I have no idea if we'll ever come back to Yerevan or even to Armenia, but I'm really glad that we came. Yerevan deserves to be visited.
It's time for your tech tip. Several years ago, my wife and I were living with her family in Australia for a few months between her teaching contracts. She was moving from a northern to a southern hemisphere school, and as a result of the different school calendars, had a longer than normal break between jobs. She wanted to show me the varied landscape of her native Queensland, so we went on a road trip across the state to visit friends of hers and see the sights. Part of the trip involved visiting a tiny town called Muddaburra. It's in the geographic center of the state, and the climate is such that I have never in my life been in a place that made me feel closer to death. The 2021 census said there were 158 residents of Muddaburra. The year we were there, the locals said it was probably more like 30 to 40. The town is essentially a post office and small school serving residents of nearby cattle stations. It's an arid scrubland as far as you can see. The hot breeze made it feel like I was in an oven. I could literally feel the moisture being sucked out of my eyeballs when I left the house. So when I started feeling some slight discomfort in my mouth and face, I thought it was just the weather, but day by day I developed a stronger pain in my jaw. Once we were back to civilization, I visited a dentist who sort of drilled into one of my teeth without consent to see if I could feel it, which I could, so clearly the tooth wasn't dead. I went to a proper doctor who x-rayed my whole head but couldn't find anything wrong. Well, not with my teeth anyway. But the pain kept getting worse. More dentists, more doctors, but no luck. My mind, of course, went to the worst case scenario. I probably had some kind of terrible tumor or ailment that would require removing half my face. Thankfully, on my fourth or fifth medical professional, another dentist figured it out. An internal resorption. This is apparently a condition where your immune system attacks the tooth from the inside. Why does it happen? Nobody seems to know for sure, which is not exactly a comforting explanation for a tooth falling out of your head. But I was relieved. I finally had an answer. We pulled the tooth and the problem stops. Now, if you had told me 2 months earlier that I would be losing a front tooth, I would have wept for the loss of my modeling career that was surely just around the corner, and been a little sad that I was now the living embodiment of the Florida man stereotype. But with an answer found and a solution to my pain on the table, I was ready to yank that sucker. I bring this up because so many of the issues we run into when cobbling together complex systems from multiple pieces of software, or developing custom tools, or frankly just relying on any complex application or service these days feel a lot like weird mystery diseases. Copying a name and number by hand from a piece of paper to a spreadsheet is pretty straightforward. It's slow, it's tedious, but troubleshooting problems is pretty easy. Any more complicated than that, and it all starts to feel like a black box. We have no idea what is causing the problems. We are interacting with the tool the same way we always have. The inputs and outputs haven't changed. Things are just broken. And as a result, we panic. Our minds race to the worst possible outcomes. We flail around and we'd make a giant mess. So what can we do to actually diagnose and recover from tech hiccups? Well, the first thing is that we have to accept that they are going to happen. An update will roll out that breaks your email workflow. An errant character in an uploaded file will screw up your document assembly template. Some service picked by the developer that you hired 5 years ago and were completely unaware was handling your data goes out of business, but you don't get any notification. Things like this are going to pop up, and they are out of your control. You haven't changed anything. The x-ray looks normal, but your head is in pain. This is why the first step is documentation. We know that documenting processes for human beings to follow is important, but it's just as important to keep up-to-date records and manifests of the software and tools you're using, a rough idea of what kind of functions they are performing, where they are getting data from and passing data to, and who is responsible, who to call when something goes wrong. There are resource tracking apps out there built for this, but a big old spreadsheet can do the job too. What apps and tools are you using? When does the subscription renew? What credit card is it on? What's your rep's contact info? Do you have somebody internally or externally whose job it is to know how to work with it? Put it all in there, your practice management system, your 365 licenses, your web hosting, your email marketing software, your call tracking, everything. This is a boring and tedious kind of document to produce, but an absolute lifesaver when it comes to diagnosing problems. And beyond just the off-the-shelf apps and services, any kind of workflows or automations or custom development that you've had done to facilitate things in your practice, anything where steps have been automated to remove humans, you need to be documenting the broad strokes of what's happening, inputs and outputs. Have a document for each one that outlines the basics of what's happening on a high level in case you need to migrate or rebuild in a hurry. Secondly, you want to own or understand the ownership chain of the pieces involved. This starts with the very basics, like whose name is on the account, who is being billed, is the software licensed to you? Could you go to the vendor for answers in an emergency, or is it provided to you by a reseller or a marketing agency or some other kind of third party? Where is the code for your website? Where is it hosted? If you needed to move that, could you, or would you have to ask a contractor or vendor who's upset with you because you fired him? What about your domain name and DNS records? Are those with the registrar, the host, the people who sold you the website 10 years ago and didn't renew it this year because they're out of business? What about Power Automate workflows or Zapier workflows? Are those in an account your firm owns or one set up by a developer? What about custom landing pages and forms and special tools and plugins you've had built? If they break and the guy who built them 3 years ago is currently in prison for a crypto scam, do you have any way to get the code to a new developer? Ask these questions now and understand broadly where things sit. You might not need to be in control of every single piece, but you need to know who is. And lastly, as you can probably guess, anything you can do to remove complexity makes solving these problems much easier. Troubleshooting an issue with a process that involves one app or service is a lot easier than doing it when 5 or 6 are involved. Now, when we are leading the pack and pushing the envelope, we often need to push the tools a little beyond what's available in the stock offerings. We need to combine them and tweak them to provide the service and the functionality we're after. But technology moves fast. If you look at any tool or process or workflow you built 2 or 3 years ago, chances are there is a better or simpler way to do it. Some other program you are already using has incorporated the functionality, or some new platform has emerged that does 90% of what your custom solution does in a single tool for a third of the cost. There's not a single thing I ever look at that I have built for the business more than 24 months ago that I would do exactly the same way if I had to start over. There's always a newer, more streamlined option available. Now, that doesn't mean you should change horses every 3 weeks, but it does mean you should audit things every couple of years to see where you can reduce the complexity and remove the room for error. I'm Ned Days, and that's your tech tip.
And now for your moment of concise advice. I had a conversation the other day with a law firm associate, and she was on the verge of losing it. Her head was practically exploding. She had been tasked with getting a simple motion to continue in what should have been a really easy case. And the partner in her law firm had told her, he had said to her, just prepare a 1-paragraph pleading, email it to the clerk, make a follow-up phone call. That's it. You'll be done. And it sounded so simple, really no big deal, except that that's not the way it turned out. It was anything but simple. What should have taken her a half an hour, maybe an afternoon, worst case, it turned into nearly 2 weeks of absolute chaos. She ended up with in-person visits to the courthouse. She ended up with 3 visits to the judge's chambers. She had this endless back and forth with the clerk's office over the phone. And by the time it was over, the associate had sunk hours and hours into this simple motion to continue. And she knew that the partner, he was going to write off the time. There was no way he was going to bill for this. It was not something that the partner could justify to the client. And it was not a good situation for her, and the partner was really not happy with the way things had gone. But here's the reality. That's just how long it took. That's what had to be done to get the motion granted. That's how much work was required to do what needed to be done. Now, the associate, she was frustrated, and I understand that. I think she was rightfully frustrated. It shouldn't have gone the way it went, but it did. And here's what I told her, and I do think it helped her to see the bigger picture. This is actually a piece of advice that was given to me many years ago when I was frustrated by something stupid and bureaucratic and insane, when the system, when the bureaucracy was just sucking the life out of me, a lot like I think it was sucking the life out of her. And the advice was this: you've got to embrace the suck. Ultimately, that's why lawyers have jobs. We're hired to deal with the endless inefficiencies, the maddening bureaucracy, and the stupidity of systems that should work but way too often don't work. If everything was smooth, if you could walk up to a kiosk and get justice dispensed like you were ordering a latte, well, guess what? We wouldn't have jobs. We are here because of this great big mess. We are here because things don't go well. It is our job to navigate the mess. We are the people that are hired to figure out how to get through it, to fight through the frustration and the inefficiency, and to solve the problem. Now, I get it. Winning a motion to continue, it does not feel like that big win moment that we all signed up for. You're dreaming of that day when you're standing in court and making your case and pulling off an amazing victory. But the reality of the practice of law, the bulk of what we do, it isn't about glory. It's about managing the suck. So yeah, she was frustrated, and you can be frustrated, and you can shake your fist at the system. Or alternatively, you can accept that this is what we do every day, and you can realize that if it weren't for the mess, we wouldn't be here. So I say embrace it, own it, because if you are not dealing with the suck, well, then you are probably not in the game. And that's your moment of concise advice. Wrapping up from Yerevan, thanks for spending a few minutes with me and Ned today. We hope you have a great weekend and an even better week next week. Keep plugging away, moving forward, and getting things done. You're on the right track. You'll get there, I promise. We're all in this together, and together we build better practices through better marketing, better management, and better technology. Until next time, I'm Lee Rosen.
Thanks for listening to Your Law Firm. Subscribe to the Friday File at roseninstitute.com and join thousands of lawyers focused on working on, instead of in their practices. You'll find safe, successful, actionable approaches for transforming your firm. Sign up for free at roseninstitute.com.